There is a quiet judgment that follows people who spend too much time alone. It is never spoken directly. It shows up in sideways comments, in concerned looks, in the assumption that something must be missing. If you are single for too long, society does not ask what you are building. It asks what is wrong. Because somewhere along the line, we decided that strength comes from togetherness. That maturity looks like pairing up. That stability means someone else is always there to lean on. But almost no one stops to ask a more uncomfortable question. What if solitude is not weakening you? What if it is training you? What if the strongest minds are not forged in constant connection, but in long stretches of psychological independence? Because when you strip away the noise, the reassurance, the emotional buffering that comes from always having someone nearby, something very specific happens to the human mind. It adapts. And adaptation is how strength is built. Most people treat being single like a temporary malfunction. A phase to get through. A problem to solve. A gap between real-life milestones. But history does not support this idea. Many of the most mentally resilient, original, and self-directed individuals spent large portions of their lives alone. Not isolated. Not withdrawn. But unentangled. They were not constantly negotiating their inner world with someone else. They were not regulating themselves through approval. They were not softening their thoughts to keep harmony. They learned to stand internally. Solitude did not make them weaker. It made them precise. And precision is a form of strength most people never develop. When you are in a relationship, even a healthy one, your nervous system is partially outsourced. Someone else helps regulate your emotions. Someone else absorbs your stress. Someone else helps you make sense of uncertainty. This is not wrong. But it does slow certain kinds of psychological growth. Because when someone else helps stabilize you, you do not have to learn how to stabilize yourself fully. Solitude removes that support structure. If you feel anxious, you sit with it. If you feel lost, you navigate it. If you feel overwhelmed, there is no one to hand it off to. This feels uncomfortable at first. Sometimes unbearable. But discomfort is not damage. It is stimulus. And stimulus is how the mind strengthens. When you cannot offload your emotions, you are forced to process them. When you cannot distract yourself with another person's presence, you are forced to listen inward. When you cannot rely on reassurance, you begin developing self-trust. This is how emotional self-regulation is built. Not through theory. Through exposure. Think about how muscles grow. They grow under resistance. Not comfort. The mind works the same way. A mind that is constantly soothed externally becomes dependent. A mind that learns to hold itself becomes resilient. Solitude removes emotional crutches. It forces you into dialogue with yourself. And that dialogue, over time, becomes sophisticated. You begin to recognize your own patterns. Your triggers. Your avoidance strategies. You notice how quickly your mind tries to escape discomfort. You see which emotions you habitually suppress. You learn what boredom is actually covering up. This is not pleasant work. But it is honest. And honesty is the foundation of mental strength. Solitude also changes how you think. When you are surrounded by others, even unconsciously, your thoughts are shaped by the group. Opinions drift toward consensus. Beliefs soften to avoid friction. Identity becomes negotiated. Most people never realize how much of their thinking is borrowed. Solitude disrupts this. When no one is watching, your mind is free to wander without correction. You are not performing intelligence. You are discovering it. Original thoughts tend to emerge in private. Unpopular questions surface when there is no social penalty. Intellectual courage develops when agreement is no longer required for safety. This is why solitude has always been associated with philosophy, creativity, and deep insight. Not because solitude is magical, but because it removes pressure. And pressure distorts thinking. When you spend time alone long enough, you begin to hear your own voice clearly. Not the voice shaped by expectations. Not the voice that tries to be reasonable. But the quieter one underneath. This voice often surprises people. It does not always align with what they thought they wanted. It does not always match the life script they were following. And this can be frightening. Because clarity creates responsibility. Once you know what you actually think, you cannot unknow it. Once you see what matters to you, pretending becomes exhausting. Many people avoid solitude for this reason. Not because they fear loneliness, but because they fear truth. Emotional regulation is one of the most underrated outcomes of solitude. Most people think emotional strength means not feeling things. It does not. It means being able to feel without being hijacked. Solitude trains this. When emotions arise and there is no immediate outlet, you learn to sit with sensation. You learn the difference between feeling and reacting. You learn that emotions peak, move, and pass if you let them. This is not suppression. It is integration. You stop panicking when discomfort appears. You stop interpreting every feeling as a problem. Over time, emotions become information instead of threats. And people who can do this are very difficult to destabilize. They are not calm because life is easy. They are calm because they have survived their own inner storms without external rescue. Solitude also strengthens decision-making in ways that are rarely acknowledged. When your life is shared, decisions are negotiated. This teaches compromise, but it also trains hesitation. You learn to dilute instincts. You learn to delay clarity. You learn to justify choices emotionally rather than own them fully. Solitude removes that. When you are single, every choice lands on you. Every consequence belongs to you. This is heavy at first. But it sharpens judgment. You become more deliberate. More intuitive. More honest about your limits and desires. You stop making choices to maintain harmony. You start making choices to maintain integrity. A mind that is used to owning its decisions develops confidence that is quiet and immovable. Not arrogance. Not bravado. But internal authority. At some point, loneliness appears. This is where most people quit. They confuse loneliness with failure. They assume solitude has gone too far. They rush back to distraction. But loneliness is not the opposite of solitude. Loneliness is resistance to solitude. It is the mind protesting the loss of familiar regulation. It is the withdrawal symptom of constant stimulation. If you stay present through this phase, something shifts. Loneliness softens. The mind settles. Solitude becomes spacious instead of heavy. This is the point where strength begins to solidify. Not because loneliness disappears forever, but because it no longer controls you. You realize you can feel it without being defined by it. People who pass through this stage come out changed. They do not relate to relationships the same way anymore. They are no longer desperate for completion. They are no longer afraid of being alone. They are no longer willing to trade clarity for comfort. When they choose connection, it is deliberate. They look for alignment, not reassurance. Depth, not distraction. Mutual sovereignty, not dependency. They are not anti-relationship. They are anti-unconscious attachment. Solitude has trained them to be whole. And whole people love differently. This is the quiet advantage of solitude. There are no visible trophies. No public milestones. No applause. From the outside, it can look like nothing is happening. But internally, structure is forming. Self-trust. emotional resilience, independent thought, clear values. These things cannot be rushed. They cannot be outsourced. They cannot be built in constant company. Solitude is the training ground. Not for everyone. Not forever. But for those who feel called to it, it is not a mistake. It is preparation. So if you find yourself single and growing rather than shrinking, do not rush to explain yourself. If solitude feels challenging but meaningful, do not assume something is wrong. Strength does not always look social. Growth does not always look busy. And maturity does not always arrive with a +1. Sometimes, the strongest minds are built quietly. Away from the noise. Away from distraction. Solitude does not make you stronger by adding something to your life. It makes you stronger by taking distractions away.